cultural appropriation is one. White privilege is another. There's all these like
right, but still, go back to what cultural appropriation. Like you said that no one was saying don't do it.
Right. So what
are they doing when they're trying to chop someone's dreads off?
Okay, I don't know about I mean, what example? You mean the San Francisco State example where the girl attacked the guy? I mean, that girl was just inarticulately expressing some insanity. I don't think that's defensible. And I think most of the articles and the stuff that I read about that specific instance are just like basically saying that woman's a lunatic.
Well, I've heard people, though, enforce it, and I know someone who was mad at their friend, is a black girl, was mad at her friend who was a white girl, who had braids. She had, like, cornrows, and she was mad because she was saying that it's cultural appropriation. I said, do you know about Bo Derek?
Right.
Like she was one of the first people to ever have cornrows.
Or the Romans, you know, there's cornrows on Roman coins, actually, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a crazy thing to call that cultural appropriation, but also saying that a white person shouldn't wear that. That's fucking crazy. Because what about a black guy wearing a polo shirt?
Well, there's a good example, right?
Yeah.
And again, I'm not the greatest advocate for this position. I just read so much that made me empathize with the position. Not necessarily agree with it, but empathize with where it's coming from. So the polo, for example, when you see you as a white dude or me as a white dude, when I see somebody wearing a polo, it's just a polo. It has no historical antecedent. It has no historical baggage to it. It has no connection to systemic racism or Elvis Presley stealing the cream of the intellectual musical crop and then never giving back to that community, or Iggy Azalea coming and adopting a black accent and then just like taking all the money and running. You know, it has no connection to deeper root systems like these trees have that communicate with each other, like taste bitter, right? So all it is a polo. It's just a guy wearing a polo. And that's why the counter argument doesn't make sense, because it's like nobody's upset when they see a black dude in a polo shirt. I mean, maybe some weird racist guy is, but mostly not. On the other hand, when a person sees a white person affecting a deep part of black culture without any of the baggage that is associated with it. Like, for example, dreads, right? One of the arguments I read a lot is that, like, white people wearing braids and dreads, you know, you get rewarded for it. You look cool. You look awesome. And meanwhile, black women are having a difficult time getting a job because they have black hair. Or black people are getting fired from jobs because they have dreads, right? So there's these consequences that black people experience because of black shit that white people that are adopting it don't necessarily experience.
I don't think that's true at all. I think if you were working in an office and some white dude had dreads, you'd be highly suspicious of his behavior.
Well, for example,
you'd be like, this guy's kind of a dork.
I hear what you're saying.
I mean, want to hire him. There's a guy who had hair like you, and right next to him is some stinky white dude with them stinky dreads, because dreads stink.
Okay, take dreads out. Let's say
that's a good example that you used.
Well, there in the U.S. military, there was just a new set of acceptable hairstyles, and almost every one of the unacceptable hairstyles that they put into place was basically black hair.
Like what?
Braids, wearing your hair natural. I don't know the
natural. What do you mean?
I mean, we'd have to pull
like an afro.
Yeah,
like a short afro.
Yeah, I mean,
you're not allowed to do that.
You'd have to pull up the article to give the specific examples, but basically, there are a million different examples like that. And like I said, I'm not necessarily an advocate for heed and honor the call of the appropriation accuser. I'm more now realizing that there's like just a lot of deep emotional weird trauma underneath every accusation of appropriation. It's not that I think therefore white girls shouldn't wear braids. It's that I think I understand more where the person that is upset is coming from. It just from a compassion perspective.
Yeah, no, I get that. It just logically doesn't jive.
It's not about logic.
Yeah, but it should be. All human interaction should have some base in logic if you're going to communicate with things.
I don't agree, because emotions aren't about logic.
Right, but should anybody be subject to your own emotions? Should you change your behavior, your dress? If you're a person who's completely not racist, but you enjoy the way your hair looks if it's in braids, should you take into consideration all the people that you're going to run into and they're going to be upset at you over braids, even though they're ignorant about the history of braids and cornrows?
Sure.
Should you alter or change your behavior? Should you accept the fact that you're just going to have a certain amount of cultural appropriation?
Well, let me ask you this. Like, if you... I don't have an answer to that question. I don't think so.
Isn't that is an important part of this? I mean, if you're going to accept the fact that there's some sort of an emotional attachment to these things, and that's where the argument comes from, shouldn't you decide or at least contemplate whether or not that emotion is valid? It doesn't seem to be. It seems to be there's real examples of racism and horrible things. Like if you want to, make your eyes squinty and look like a Japanese character from a Bugs Bunny cartoon in, 1940, and then you want to go to a party and people think you're a racist, you should be aware that you're presenting an image that is inherently racist. Like that's something that's kind of fucked up, and you should be considerate about the way people's emotions are going to fire up looking at your image.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, but that's a different thing than braids.
But that's what I'm not advocating. First of all, I'm not advocating anything. I'm just saying I've delved into this topic enough that I've started to understand where people are coming from when they get activated by this stuff.
I understand too, but I think a big part of it is reinforcement in the community that that's acceptable to be upset at people for cornrows or braids.
I actually don't disagree with you. I think you're right about that, and yet I think it also is connected to like a legitimate emotional reality that's happening. Like, for example, by the way, logic is very important, and I would say logic is more important than emotion when it comes to communication. But it doesn't, because something is more important, doesn't negate the importance of the other thing.
Well, it certainly doesn't solve the situation just by clearly using logic. You might get a certain percentage of the people that agree with you because of logic, but that's more rare than it is common.
Right. It's like, would you feel comfortable going to a Native American powwow, with a headdress on? Not even a powwow. There's a powwow next door. No. You can see it, and you're at a music festival. Would you wear an Indian headdress?
No, I wouldn't. But the reason why you can't, and the reason why you shouldn't, or the reason why it's an issue, is because the people are marginalized. Let me take my own people. I'm Italian, and my people, for the longest time, there was a lot of anti-Italian racism. My grandfather used to talk to me about it, what it was like coming off the boat. But then somewhere along the line, it became acceptable for Italians in American culture, where it's not there's no real racism. It doesn't stick. Like you call it Italian a guinea. Yeah. You can call us a guinea to our face. We'll laugh. No one cares. You can make meatballs and spaghetti all day long. Nobody gives a shit.
Totally.
Nobody accuses you of, you have a pizza party. Nobody thinks it's cultural appropriation. But try having a taco party. Try having Taco Tuesdays. People get pissed at you. Why? Because Mexicans still experience real racism in this country, whereas Italians largely just don't.
Right. And like Taco Tuesday is an example of something that's like, who fucking cares? That's not important. And so if
but wearing a sombrero is offensive to a lot of people.
If that's as deep as most people go, right? That's dumb. What are you talking about? A candy taco? I mean, that's dumb, and it is dumb. But if you kind of like get under the dumb, which is the name of my third special, so it's mouth
get
fucking
under the dumb.
It's live in Oakland. mouth fucking Hitler, and then get under the dumb. But if you get under the first, like the most epidermal layer of like flashy insanity, and go like, what's really happening here? Is like, oh, it's just what you're saying. Actually, you're more woke than you let on, Joe.
Interesting.
It's like, it's really about like power dynamics. It's not really about the appropriation incident, although on some level maybe it is. It's really about the power dynamic underneath it.
Well, I think one of the things that we're seeing in universities in particular is people that are exercising the ability to affect change even if it doesn't make sense. Because they have the ability to point out something that they think is incorrect or is unjust, and then they attack it and go after it, and then they see results.
Right.
And by seeing those results, it's almost in a lot of ways kind of attached to the same idea, like if you're worth X amount of dollars, why do you still chase money? Because you're trying to get the thrill of the accomplishment. There's the game that's going on. And there's a certain amount of game going on trying to get that white kid that you don't even know to cut off his dreads. Whether or not you know that the Romans wore dreads, whether or not you know that the Greeks wore dreads, the Vikings, all these different people had them, it doesn't matter. It's like there's a little tiny white guy, and that girl could yell at that white guy and then chase him with a pair of scissors.
Yeah, exactly. It's the incidents are the absurdity, but the conceptual current is somewhat valid. I mean, to some degree.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, but to some degree, like even you. And I think that you're naturally skeptical towards concepts like cultural appropriation because, and I am too, because especially as comedians, it's very easy to see the absurdity. It's so stupid and it's so pointless. Like we can't not adopt each other's cultures. That won't ever happen. So, but even we go, okay, but I wouldn't wear a sombrero to a Mexican club. I wouldn't walk into a club like, oh, hey, what's up?
Right.
So if you say, okay, it's almost pornography, right? I know it when I see it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I know it's offensive when I feel it,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
So if you kind of expand further and go, okay, even the absurd examples, I kind of I'm going to try to understand, for me, I'm going to try to understand where people are coming from with that. Then I can kind of contextualize it. Now, I don't have to agree with it, but I can at least say, oh, I get where this is coming from. It's coming from historical antecedents of racism and oppression that are connected to hairstyle and all of these musicians that have taken black culture and made money off of it. There's all this like deeper sedimentary layers of emotionality. I don't have to heed it and change accordingly, but I would be foolish to ignore it.
Right. Yeah, that completely makes sense. And also, I get it from a point of view of a person who comes from a culture that used to be maligned and isn't anymore.